Assalamualaikum class. Hope you are all fine and safe. In today's lecture, we are going to start our next topic, that is the motivation. But before starting the motivation, let's have a quick recap what we have studied till now. We started with the definition of psychology, that actually psychology is a science or you can say the scientific study of the consciousness and the behavior, in which we know that it is actually the scientific study, which means that we actually collect information, then we collect information, then then we draw inferences and the conclusion from that particular information. Then we discuss a different school of thoughts. Approximately we discuss the 5 to 7 school of thoughts. Started with the structuralism, that was the given by the Edward Titchener and the William Wundt. According to this structuralism, that our consciousness is actually being a psychologist, our focus should be on the elements of the mind, or you can say elements of the perception. He actually he actually defined science as a science of the consciousness. Then, according to the Titchener, that he broke the consciousness into the three basic elements: physical sensations, feeling, and the images. Then we talked about the functionalism. According to the functionalism, our main focus, you can say that our main focus should be on the function of the mind, rather than the focus on the structure of perception and the consciousness. We should focus on the function of mind, that we should actually based on the we should actually focus on how our consciousness help us to adapt into a certain sort of the environment. Why? Because obviously our environment, our mind are constantly weaving associations, revising experiences, starting, stopping, jumping back. So the perception and emotions and images, according to the functionalism, which was proposed by the William James. According to the functionalism, we cannot we cannot separate perception, emotions, and imagination. Why? Because the consciousness actually flow in the continuous stream. Then we talked about the psychodynamic perspective, in which the major contributor was the Sigmund Freud. According to the Sigmund Freud, that actually our unconscious desires and the conflicts lie at the root of our at the root of our behavior. So according to the Freud, our personalities actually developed into the different series of the critical stages during the first few years. And he talked about that we are actually motivated by the unconscious instinct and urges that are not available to the rational and the conscious part of the mind, or that even we are not being aware of these all these drives and motives. Then we talked about the behaviorism. In a behaviorism, we talked about that psychology. We discuss psychology as a study of the observable and the measurable behavior. According to the behaviorism, we should, being a psychiatrist or being a psychologist, we should focus on the observable behavior rather than focusing on the mind and the consciousness, as we discuss in the as we discuss in the functionalism, structuralism. According to the J.B. Watson, that is a major contributor. According to the J.B. Watson, that we should focus on the observable behavior, that is actually a result of the stimulus response in the environment. That our behavior is actually a learned response to some stimulus in the environment. So, what he called it as um, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and the classical conditioning. Then we discussed about the Gestalt psychology. That Gestalt psychology was actually given by the Gestalt. According to Gestalt psychology, our perceptions is actually or you can say that it is our refer to the our mind, or you can say it is our tendency of minds to see different patterns, to distinguish object from its background, to complete our picture from the figure. So Gestalt psychology actually focused on the study of the perception, and he defined psychology as a study of the perceptual organizations. Then we talked about the humanistic perspective. The major contributor was the Carl Roger and the Maslow. According to the you can say, according to the humanistic perspective, our psychology, or know, every person should have the free will, and every person have free will. To being a psychologist, our first priority is to assist humankind to achieve their full potential, or you can say to achieve its self actualization. So according to the this school of thought, the people must learn that how to realize their human potential, and how to focus on the unity of mind. Then we talked about the topic of the sensation, that in sensation, what is sensation is actually the sensation is the process of taking up the information from the environment and then processing that information to the brain. In the sensation, we talked about different we talked about the different five senses. We talked about the sensory adaptation. We talked about the signal detection theory. We talked about the different threshold, that there are the three type of the threshold. Absolute threshold, that is the minimum amount of energy required to that is the minimum amount of energy that is required to trigger any sensory receptor. Then we talked about the terminal threshold, that the maximum amount of energy that is required to trigger your you can say that can trigger your sensory receptor. But sometimes terminal threshold make you feel pain. For example, the loud music, or you can say the bright light. Then we talked about the just noticeable difference threshold, that and in which we talked about the Weber's law, you can say that the change in the stimulus doesn't matter, the proportion of the change matters. Then we talked about the perception. Perception is actually the interpreting and organizing of information that we receive through sensation. In sensation, we receive information from the environment. We receive stimulus from the environment. Now, using our top down processing, we actually process that information, we organize that information that are coming up to us. In the perception, we talked about the different perceptual laws, or you can say they are the different laws of perceptual organization, in which we talked about the law of proximity, law of similarity, law of closure, and law of similar fate, law of common fate. And then we talked about the figure ground. If you remember, we talked about the figure ground theory, that in which our brain has a tendency to see to distinguish an object from its background. For example, if you remember the if you remember, if someone give you give you or even the some if some person call your name, then you will immediately give attention to that particular person. This is what we call figure ground. Then we talked about the vestibular sense and the kinesthetic senses. Then we talked about the consciousness and the sleep. That in consciousness, we talked about the different altered state of the consciousness, that our brain actually works as a dual track theory. In a dual track theory, we talked about that there are the two ways in which our brain is working. First one is the conscious activity, that you consciously think about that particular activity. Then we talked about the law track, that is the unconscious. Our brain actually not only focusing on the one thing, it actually working on unconsciously on many other things. For example, form, depth, etc., etc. If we talk about the dual track theory, implications of the dual track theory, there are the two major implications of the dual track theory. First one is selective attention. Sorry. First one is the selective attention, in which our focus is on that our brain actually avoid our brain focus, or we notice that what we want to notice. The next one was the selective inattention, or inattention blindness. If we do not notice that we do not want to notice. So then we talked about the sleep. That sleep is actually the altered state of mind. When you are in the sleep, you are actually unconscious. Then we talked about the four different stages of. Actually, we talked about the two type of sleep. One was the REM sleep, that is the rapid eye movement sleep, and the next second one was the non-rapid eye movement sleep. This is what we called NREM. In NREM, we talked about the four stages. That in the first step, you are just awake, and in the 3 and 4 stage, you are actually in a very deep sleep. And what is REM sleep? REM is actually the paradoxical sleep, that in which you are totally immobile, but your brain is active, and this is the stage where the dreams comes. Then we talked about the memory, that they are the different type of memory. In memory, we talked about the three major type of memory. The first one was the sensory memory, or you can say sensory registers, in which you actually store information for a few seconds. Then we talked about the short-term memory and the long-term memory. In the long-term memory, we talked about the semantic memory and the episodic memory. That we have the different. If you talked about your personal experiences, this is what we call episodic memory. If you talk about the general rules and regulations, this is what we called semantic memory. Then we talked about the procedural memory, that every skill you learn is actually stored in your procedural memory. Then we talked about the learning. Sorry, the learning is missing in the slide. Then we talked about learning, that what is learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in your behavior. Then we talked about the three major type of the learning, that is learning by association, learning by observation, and the learning by cognition. In learning by association, we came to know that we learned through making associations. For example, in the classical conditioning, we actually associate the neutral stimulus with the natural stimulus, and then that neutral stimulus convert into the inconditional stimulus. Then we talked about the operant conditioning, in which your behavior is actually the result of the consequences, or the function of the consequences, in which the punishment and the reinforcement play a major role in determining your personality. The learning is actually the practical implications of the behaviorism school of thought. When we talked about the behaviorism, the learning is actually the implications. The classical conditioning, if you talk about the classical conditioning and operant conditioning, these are all actually the implications of the behaviorism. In classical conditioning, we actually associate two different stimulus, and in operant conditioning, we associate our behavior with the consequences, that is reward and the punishment. When you are when you, if you want to encourage someone's behavior, you will start giving him or her reward. If you want to remove or decrease the consequence, decrease the likelihood of any behavior, you will start giving punishment. And then we talked about the learning by observation. Obviously, we learn by observing certain things. We learn by observing. We learn from dramas. We learn from movies. We learn from our parents. We learn from our society. This is what we call learning by observation. That actually we watch others to do certain things, then we try to replicate or we try to imitate that thing. Then we talked about the learning by cognition, that sometimes learning by cognition is actually opposite to the learning operant conditioning and the classical conditioning. In operant and classical conditioning, we were focusing on the stimulus response model. But in terms of the learning by cognition, according to the learning by cognition, we learn because of our own thinking capacity, our own wisdom. We, being a human mind, have a mind. We have consciousness. We have thinking capacity. We are able to think. We have different thoughts. We have different ideas, and using that different thoughts and ideas and the wisdom, we actually learn different things. Then we talked about the personality. That in personality, we talked about the different type of personalities and the different theories related to the personality. That what is actually the personality? Obviously, when we talk about the personality, personality is your enduring characteristic that someone possesses. And enduring is very important in this definition. That enduring means that it is everlasting, or you can say dominant over the specific period of time. In personality, we talked about the two type of personality. That first one is the private personality, that you actually that private personality is what you keep hidden from the society. That is your dark side. Then other type of personality is public personality, which includes your mannerism, your professionalism, your true, you can say the personality you actually express in the society or express in the public. Then we talked about the determinants of the personality. Obviously, nature and the nurture both play a major role in determining someone's personality. Then we talked about the different theories of personality, starting with the psychodynamic perspective. We talked about the two major type of personalities. First one was two major theories of personality. First one was the Sigmund Freud's personality, and in this we've talked about that there are the certain unconscious desires and unconscious motives, or you can say there are the certain there are the certain instinct that actually make what we are. These are the two. There are the two type of instinct. One is the life instinct, and the other one is the death instinct. Life instinct will actually move you toward your survival, and if you talk about the free death instinct, that will actually move you away from your survival. Then we talked about the Jung's personality theory. In Jung's personality theory, he talked about the collective consciousness. Freud talked about the three perspective of personality: id, superego, and ego. But The Jungs actually talked about the collective unconsciousness, that every person, or you can say being a part of each species, or being a part of a humankind, we all share the same unconsciousness, and this same unconscious actually contains the experiences, or you can say the genetic experiences of our ancestors. He talked about the different archetypes, that there are the different archetypes. He talked about the persona, shadow, anima, animus, and the self. And according to him, the self is actually the unity, or you can say wholeness. And being an individual, we are striving for that particular whole, or for that particular self. Then we talked about the different trade theories. In a trade theories, we talked about in a trade theories, we actually talked about that there are certain traits that actually make what you are, and that these traits are the characteristics. These traits are the endurable characteristics. Trade theory actually includes that, rather than the unconscious things, obviously, which we discussed in the psychodynamic approach. According to the trait theory, we all have certain traits, and these traits are our inborn ability or inborn characteristics, and our personality is actually a result of that trait. For example, someone is very quiet, someone is very talkative, someone is very shy, aggressive, and these are actually the traits of each personality. In trait theory, we talked about the two major theories. One was the Golden Albert theory, and the other one was the Big Five personality trait. In Golden Albert theory, we talked about the three types of, three types of personality traits. First one was the cardinal trait, that is the major trait, that is a rare trait, or that is a dominant trait in someone's personality. Then we talked about this central trait. These are actually the combination of the 6 to 12 traits that vary from one person to the person. And the last one is the secondary trait. These are actually our you can say that these are actually our attitude and the preferences, and these are very situation specific, and these traits are very situation specific. Then we talked about the ocean trait. Then we talked about the ocean, or ocean means big five personality trait, in which we talked about the openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and the neuroticism. Then we talked about then after trait theory, we talked about the different humanistic personality theory, in which we talked about that we talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of need, that according to the humanistic perspective, our personality is actually inspired by the certain goals, and motivated by the certain goals, that we have certain goals, and these certain goals actually help us to achieve, to make what we have. So this is all about what we have actually studied in the previous lectures. Now, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss the next topic, that is the motivation. And this motivation chapter is actually linked with the personality. We will discuss many aspects of the personality, topic of personality in this motivation. So after this lecture, you will be able to discuss how psychologists define motivation, what are the different perspectives of motivated behavior, explain the instinct theory of the motivation. You will able to describe the drive reduction theory. Now coming toward the what is actually motivation. If we talk about the motivation, it comes from the word motive, that is related from word movere, which means move. So according to the motivation, motivation is something that make us move, that defeat of, you can say that defeat our laziness and move us to the certain direction. So if we talk about the major definition of motivation, the motivation is defined as the need or the desire that energizes and directs behavior. So motivation is your motivation. There are the three major aspects of motivation. The first one is as a need or desire. What is actually a need? A need is any sort of deficiency. We need mobile phones. Why? Because we lack mobile phone. We need water. Why? Because we are lacking that water. So need is actually your can say the need is the deficiency, and or desire is something you want. So motivation is actually a need. Sometimes that is the requirement of the situation, and sometimes it is your desire that you want that particular thing, which energize. You can link the energize from the with the move, that when you are saying that energize mean you are moving towards certain direction, you are moving, you are defeating your you are defeating your laziness, and you are motivated, you are moving towards certain things, towards certain motive, or you can say to certain thing. and directs behavior. Direction is very important. Whenever you talk about the motivation, or even whenever, even in normal things, or in normal language, you have the word motivation. The motivation is always towards certain things. Motivation to learn, you can say, motivation to study, motivation to drink water, motivation to even bath, motivation to enjoyment, to enjoy. So motivation actually, when you talk about the motivation, motivation is always in a certain direction. So motivation is defined as a need or the desire that energize and direct someone's behavior. So motivation, I'm again repeating that motivation actually comes from the word mover, which means to move. So psychologists who actually study motivation focused on the both internal and the external influences that might move a person to the certain specific direction. So it will energize you, it will give you direction, and it will energize you, or you can say it will energize you toward a certain goal. That goal can be anything. It can be any physical activity, it can be any psychological activity. So when we talked about the motivation, it is a very broad term. So motivation, obviously, when we talk about the motivation, motivation is actually a, or you can say that my motivation is actually the psychological thing. It is not, it is not the a physical thing. You can't see motivation, but you can feel the motivation by the excitement you are feeling, by the excitement you have. So motivation, you can also say the motivation is actually the set of the psychological forces that influence you, or that influence your behavior in a certain direction, in a certain direction. And it actually, motivation move in a three different ways. It will change your level of activity, or it would actually change your action toward a particular goal, or it sometimes make you responsive towards certain a certain goal. So motivation is actually the set of different conditions which activate your behavior, direct your behavior towards certain goals, and maintain your behavior until the goal is reached. Persistency is very important. Motivation is something that actually maintain your behavior until your goal is reached. Now coming toward the different perspective of a different perspective of different perspective of different perspective related to the motivation. That there we have the different theories to the we have the different theories related to the motivation. The first one is the instinct theory, that is actually based on the instinct of the person. Then we have the derived reduction theory, which is responsive to the inner pushes. Then we have the arousal theory, that is the right level of the stimulus. Incentive theory and the master theory. Let's discuss them one by one. Coming toward the first theory, that is the instinct theory. Okay, according to the instinct theory of the motivation, all the organisms, including humans, are born with innate biological tendencies that help them to survive. This theory suggests that actually the instinct are the everything that drives all behavior. So, what exactly is instinct? Instinct is you can say instinct is a complex behavior that must have the fixed pattern throughout a species and be unlearned. Okay, now coming toward first thing, that is the fixed pattern. What is meant by the fixed pattern? That is obviously when we talked about instinct, it is nothing based on the nature nurture. It is all based on the nurture. So it is your innate pattern. It is your innate pattern. It is a fixed pattern. Why? Because it is written. It is embedded in your DNA. You can't deviate from that particular thing. So it is what we call the fixed pattern or the innate pattern. Remember, instinct, when we talked about the instinct it what we call our innate behavior. According to this theory, every human being, including animals, including people, they are all born with the pre-programmed. We are all pre-programmed with a set of different behaviors essential to our survival. So those instinct, those are those fixed pattern, those behaviors actually provide us the energy that actually channel our behavior, that actually direct our behavior in an appropriate direction. If you remember the personality, and if you remember the psychodynamic perspective, or if you remember the fruits theory, according to the Freud, he identified the two kind of instinct. One was the eros, that was the life instinct, and the other was, if you remember, the thanatos, or the death instinct. And according to him, uh, according to him, actually instinct, what he called instinct, is something that you can't control, that you can't override. So this is what we call the innate theory of motivation. I'm repeating that. Innate, what is instinct approach to the motivation? According to the instinct approach of the motivation, we are all pre-programmed, and our pre-programming make us, or make us motivated. For example, take the example of the birds. All the birds, have the innate need to migrate before winter. Let's take the example of the ducklings, that ducklings have the innate behavior to follow one and other. Take the example of, even take the example of the humans, baby and the mother. That obviously, if you talk about the humans, or if you talk about the innate behavior, let's take the example of the mother and the baby. Obviously, whenever our child is in a very the child is not when the child is not able to sleep and is not calm, the human mother will attempt to provide that baby the comfort, who has been crying all the night, and will not sleep until he sees that baby is calm and asleep. So according to this instinct theory, the human mother behave in this way because they were biologically programmed to do so. It is the mother instinct to provide comfort to her child. So according to the this theory, according to this theory, it is said that this human mother's behavior is actually not because of any conditioning, or not because of any learning. That mother, having weak or strong female, belong to the rich family or the poor family, it is all because of their instinct. That is why they cannot override the motivation to take care of their children. So this is what we call instinct theory of motivation. I'm again repeating that. What is instinct? Instinct, according to the instinct theory, we are all motivated by our inborn and automated behavior, and that inborn automated behavior is a part of our genes. We can't deny, we can't deviate from this particular thing. So according to this theory, we are motivated, we do things, we do certain actions, we energize, we arouse. Why? Due to our instinct. Now coming toward the criticism that this theory, obviously, when we talk about the different theory, there are the two major criticism of the theory. First one is, obviously, all our behaviors are not the result of the are not result of the inborn or instinct. For example, how to write, reading, writing, watching movies, and you're doing different activities. These are the activities that we are not born with. So these are the things we learned through our experiences. So uh, the major criticism of instinct theory of motivation, that our all behaviors are not result of our innate patterns, but they are the certain things, they are the certain behaviors that we actually learn through different experiences. The next come is, the human behavior is really rigid, inflexible, and unchanging. According to instinct theory, obviously, when we talked about that, these are the fixed patterns, or these are the pre-programming. So we can't deny and we cannot deviate from this programming. It's mean that our behavior is very rigid and inflexible and unchanging. But obviously, obviously, if you experience, or if you observe different things, we are always undergoing the change during our lifespan in the behavior. Sometimes we like to play, even sometimes we like to watch movies, but sometimes we are not like movies. Sometimes we want ice cream, but sometimes we not. So our behavior is actually not very rigid, as discussed in this particular theory. So as a result of these all the shortcomings, newer explanations have replaced conceptions of the motivation based on instinct. However, sorry, Regardless of these criticism, these instinct approaches actually play an important role in determining the certain theory, especially based on the fruits theory. If you remember the fruits theories, or if you remember this theory, so after based on after rejecting the instinct, after rejecting the instinct theory of the motivation, we have the next theory, that is the drive reduction theory. This is our, you can say, the alternative view of motivation according to this theory. But before discussing this theory, there are the three things we need to understand. First one is the need. I'm already talked about the need. That need is your psychological definition, psychological deficiency. That when there is a deficiency, for example, you feel hungry, you feel for the food, that is your need. That this is your physiological deficiency, that you are actually lacking that particular thing. Thirst, that is your physiological deficiency. So need is actually everything that is important, or that is required to survive in the environment. Your need is actually everything, or you can say need is everything that you can, that you should satisfy in order to survive, that you should satisfy in order to survive. Then comes the drive. Drive is actually the motivational tension or arousal that energize behavior to fulfill a need. The need result in the drive. Need is deficiency. That deficiency actually motivate you to do, or that deficiency actually motivate you to remove that deficiency. That motivational arousal, this what we call is drive. I am repeating. The drive is actually, you can say, the drive is your motivational tension. You're hungry, you are lacking food, that is your need. That lacking of food, that hunger actually motivate you to buy food. That hunger actually motivate you to cook food. This is what we call drive. Need actually move into the transform into the certain tension, and you will try to satisfy that tension, and this is what we call drive. Then comes the homeostasis. This is very important. This is your body's tendency to maintain a steady internal state. If you remember the biocardiac rhythm, we talked in the consciousness. If you remember in the consciousness, we talked about the cardiac rhythm, that our body has an internal clock. That internal clock fix adjust our timing according to the 24/7 hours of the day and night. Same is the case with our homeostasis. Homeostasis is our internal equilibrium. This is the our tendency. This is actually the God gifted, and the God given us the tendency that everybody, that being a human, we have a tendency to maintain a steady internal state, and that steady internal state is actually what we call normal. So when we are when there is any need, when there is any deficiency, when there is any drive, our homeostasis try to bring us into the normal state, or you can say into the normal optimal state. Let's take the example of the thermostat or the furnace system. In a home heating system, to maintain a steady temperature, for example, you have a thermostat in your home, and if you thermostat that or even take the example of the heat geysers. Obviously this is winter, and we all have the geysers. If you set in all your geysers, they are the actually the regulator, which in which you set the temperature of the water, and whenever the temperature reaches, the plug, or you can say that your geyser automatically turned off. This is what we call regulator, and this is what we call homeostasis. This is the same case in our body. Whenever we are not in the normal state, when our body is not feeling normal, this homeostasis actually try to maintain, try to achieve that optimal state. So if you remember the sensory receptors in our body, in sensation we talked about the sensory receptors. So sensory receptors throughout your body actually constantly monitor factors such as temperature and the nutritional level. Whenever the deviation from your ideal state occurs, your body adjusts in an effort to return to an optimal state. So whenever there is a lack of food, there is a lack of water, there is a lack of stable body temperature, there is a lack of sleep, or there is a lack of certain things, we feel hungry, we feel thirsty, we feel sleepy. Why? Because this our body homeostasis is actually operating all these things. So a drive reduction theory actually works, or actually actually include these three things. Now coming to what is a drive reduction theory. Okay, a drive reduction theory. According to the drive reduction theory, we whenever we lacks our basic biological need, our body push us to satisfy that particular need. For example, you uh, you are lacking water. This will create a drive that, for example, thirsty, and that drive actually motivate you for the drinking, and it will the balance restore. So what is redive? I'm again repeating what we called drive reduction theory. First, we have a homeostasis and equal an internal equilibrium. This equilibrium get disturbed. Why? Because there is a lack of certain biological need we have, and that need actually cause a drive, create a tension in our body. And using our homeostasis, what we do, we try to reduce this tension, we try to reduce this drive. And what then we do to reduce, for reducing this drive, we actually involve in this certain type of the behaviors, and these behaviors actually lead us to the different kind of behavior, for example, even drinking, drinking food, etc., and then our balance restores. This is what we called drive reduction theory. I am repeating that what is drive reduction theory? Drive reduction theory is actually based on that our body, or you can say our motivation, or you can say that our bodily needs, such as need for food, need for water, creates a state of tension. And this tension actually, we being an being an motivate being a human being, or according to the homeostasis, we try to attempt to reduce this unpleasant state of tension in our body, and we try to return our body to the optimal stage. When we are hungry, we look for food for the to reduce the hunger drive. When we are tired, when we are very fatigued, we go to sleep. When we are thirsty, we find something to drink. In each of these cases, behavior is actually directed, or you can say behavior is actually directed toward a goal, or the goal is reducing a state of bodily tension. This is why it is we call it drive reduction theory. Why? Because we try to reduce the drive, or we try to reduce a state of bodily tension and the drive that is creating in our body. Clear? Now, criticism on the drive reduction theory, that what is the major criticism on this drive reduction theory? Although drive reduction theory provide a very good explanation of how our drives motivate people, but but these cannot fully explain a behavior in which the goal is not to reduce our drive, but rather to maintain or even increase the level of excitement and arousal. Okay. If we talk about the previous examples, this is what we call drive reduction theory. That we are actually going to reduce the drive, but sometimes, being a human being, every time we are not going to reduce our drive. Sometimes we try to increase our level of excitement. We try to increase the level of arousal. For example, take the example of the you can say, let's take the examples of the seesaws, and the different activities we have. For example, ludo, playing ludo. Why we play ludo? Is there any drive? Is this is our biological need? Why we write? Why we go for watching movie? Why we go for a long drive? Why we go for um, other side sort of the behavior that are not actually the why we go for shopping. Are these are these biological drive needs? Obviously not. So this theory, this drive reduction theory, is actually not able to explain such kind of behavior. Sometimes we do certain things due to our curiosity. Sometimes we do certain things due to our thrill seeking behavior. So when we are involving in the behavior, so obviously when we are involving in a behavior, obviously if we take the example of the thrill seeking behavior, in the thrill seeking behavior we are not reducing our excitement, we are not reducing our arousal. Actually we are improving, or we are increasing our arousal, we are increasing our level of activity. But in the case of the drive reduction theory talked about reducing the level of arousal. But sometimes when we talked about this thrill seeking behavior, let's take the example of the riding a roster, having a driving at 120 speed of 120. This is what we call thrill seeking behavior, and this theory actually not able to explain the curiosity and the thrill seeking behavior. So obviously when we talked about this is all about in today's lecture. Let's have a quick recap what we have studied in today's topic. In today's topic we talked about the motivation, that what is motivation. Motivation is motivation is a need or the desire that you want to that energize you, that influence your behavior in a certain direction. Then we talked about the two major perspective of two major theories, that why we are motivated. Obviously we drive when according to the instinct theory, there are the certain instinct or the pre-programming due to which we get motivated to do certain tasks. And according to the drive reduction theory, there are the certain drives, there are the certain motivational tension. You can say that that is due to the homeostasis capability our body would try to reduce our tension in the body. And this reduction and that actually drive make us to do certain things. Thank you so much class. Inshallah in the next lecture we will talk about the more theories of three more theories of the motivation, that is the arousal approaches, arousal need theory, a cognitive theory, and the Maslow's hierarchy of need. Thank you so much class for coming and listening. Take care. Allah Hafiz.